I'm Alex. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. If not, welcome back. I am a 24-year-old data analyst in the greater New York City area who loves Disney and reading. So this is my first book video of 2022. I'm going to be talking about all of the books I read in 2021 and my TBR list for next year. So I'm going to be looking at my phone a lot because I just wrote quick descriptions of each of the books in here to make sure I didn't forget anything. So if you see me looking down, that's why. So the first book I read this year was Little Fires Everywhere, which is a contemporary fiction novel about two very different families in a small town in Ohio whose children become friends, even though it's pretty unlikely. There's a lot of drama, of course. How else would a book be interesting? And it ends up involving the whole town and some very messy backstories that you learn. This was the first book that, like I said, it was the first book I read in 2021. It got me out of a major reading slump that I was in for almost a year and put me back on my grind. So I rated this book 5 stars. I loved it. Would highly recommend. Now things might get a little out of order, but I'm going to try my best to stay in order. Okay, I let one of my friends borrow my copy of Less, so I don't have it, but this book is considered LGBTQ literature, but it's just a romance novel, sort of, about a man who is getting older. I think he's in his late 50s, if I remember correctly, and he is trying to escape being present to watch the love of his life get married, which must be hard. But then he goes on this huge adventure, multiple countries, experiences a lot of life, and kind of finds some closure for himself. So this was a really good book. I highly recommend reading it if you have not. The next book I read is In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle. I absolutely love this book. I talk about this book in every recommendation video and every 5-star video. Absolutely everything. I think it was amazing. It is about a girl that, she has a dream one night with this vision that she's cheating on her boyfriend, and she is somebody who's very meticulous, has a really detailed, laid out 5-year plan, and it's now all ruined in her head because of this dream. So she postpones planning for her wedding to her fiance because she wants to know what is happening in her life. And I will say I've read this book so fast because I needed to know the ending. So if you're somebody who doesn't like reading, or you're in a reading slump or anything of that sort, In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle could be your cure. The next book I read was Dinner by Cesar Ira, I think is how you pronounce it, or Caesar Ira, I'm not really sure. I must say, I was given this, it's a novella, it's not a full book. I was given this as a birthday gift in 2017. It's been sitting on my shelf ever since, and I just wanted to read it. Somebody spent the money on it because they thought I would enjoy it, so I wanted to read it. I will say the original version has won a lot of awards, so I feel like the writing in the traditional language is probably better, but this is a translation, and I think it kind of just misses the mark a little bit. But it's about a family who is having dinner essentially, and the world explodes. All of the people in their town come back from the dead, from their graves, and start sucking the souls out of people in the town. I don't know. It's a weird book. It was very unique, but it was definitely not one of my favorites, and the complete opposite of In 5 Years in terms of recommending it to people. The next book I read this year was The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is another book I've had on my shelf, not exaggerating, for 7 years. I bought it, I think I was still in high school when I bought it, because I made this goal that I wanted to finish all the classic novels before I died, and obviously it's considered a classic. Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde is also a running inside joke in my family, so I really wanted to be able to understand it. But the first time I read this, I only got 40 pages into it, and then put it down for 6.5 years. So I picked this up one day. I told myself I was going to read it in one sitting. I read the whole thing. It's out of my life now. It was interesting, but I don't think it was one of my favorites in any way, shape, or form. The next book I read this year is The Mister by E.L. James. To be fully transparent, I picked this up because it was written by E.L. James. I bought this at the beginning of the pandemic thinking that it was going to get me out of my reading slump, and then I read 10 pages and gave up. So I finally read it again this year while I was waiting for Freed to come out, just to have like a taste of E.L. James's writing. But it's about a young woman who whose parents like put her on a truck to the UK in order to try to have a better life, but she gets sold into like a sex trafficking ring essentially, and she's trying to escape from that. It's a super interesting story. There is a lot of like smut in it because it's written by E.L. James. That's what she writes. If you don't like that, stay away from her books. But I found myself actually reading it for the plot, and enjoying it and needing to get to the end to find out what happens. I will say I don't have a lot of closure from this book. There are a lot of questions I still have about things that happen to the characters, and I don't think there will be a sequel, but it was really good. Speaking of E.L. James, the next book I read was Freed, which I actually don't have a physical copy of. I think I let somebody borrow it or something right after I read it, but Freed is the first book that I've ever bought on a release date of a book. It was really exciting for me. I had been waiting for 2.5 years for it to come out. I read Darker, which is the one before Freed, on New Year's Eve of 2018. So 2021, June 1st, 2021 was a long time to wait for that book. It was 768 pages and I devoured the whole thing in one day. It gave me a lot of closure that I needed from not like plot holes in 50 Shades Freed, but there are some plot holes that exist because of the point of view, being first person, so it definitely cleared up some of those things, which I was really happy to have that like closure on and learn the full story. So I thought this book was really good. I wouldn't necessarily rate it 5 stars. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everybody, but I really enjoyed it personally as somebody who is a big fan of the book in this series. So the next book that I read, and I didn't actually read it, I listened to the audiobook of it, was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. So this is a prequel to the Hunger Games series. It starts off a little bit slow, so the audiobook, the first like hour of the audiobook took me, I don't know, probably 3 weeks to get to, and then somebody told me I had to read the book, so I like listened to the rest of the audiobook fast, and it was really good, so I'm glad I got that recommendation. But it's the story of President Snow during his childhood and how he rises to power and makes the Hunger Games what they currently are, which is cool because you get to see a lot of the characters that you see throughout the series and learn a little bit more about them and what life in the capital looks like versus life in the districts. The next book I read was The Proposal by Jasmine Guillory. This is I picked it up because it looks like it's a baseball romance. It's not a baseball romance at all. In the first chapter of the book, and this is not a spoiler, it's literally on the back cover, the protagonist in the book goes to a baseball game with the guy she's dating, and he proposes to her on the kiss cam, and she says no, and it's her worst nightmare, and it becomes a mess. I thought this was a really good book. It has kind of a cliche ending that you can probably guess in the first 15 pages, but it was a nice summer read. It was fast and made me really want to go to a baseball game. The next book I read is 99 Days by Kitty Catugno. I also don't have my physical copy of this because, again, I let one of my friends borrow it, but it's very similar to the Summer I Turned Pretty series, so if that's something that you've read and enjoyed, this is probably a book that you would read and enjoy. But it's about a high school girl who has been dating this guy for a couple of years, and she ends up cheating on him with his brother, and it becomes a whole mess, and the whole town hates her, and She ends up like transferring schools, and when she comes back for the summer, she's trying to like heal her relationships with people around her. The whole thing that kind of made it blow up was the fact that she told her mom about what was going on, and her mom wrote a best-selling book about it. So it becomes a lot of drama. It was a really fast read. I think it took me like 3.5 hours to get through, and it was cute. I would recommend it if you're looking for a nice like summery YA novel. The next book is Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyers. This is another book that I listened to the audiobook of rather than reading the physical copy. I was a diehard Twilight fan in middle school. I went to see the movies on their release date for every single movie. I read through all of the books I think in 1 week. I really loved Twilight, and I had been waiting for Midnight Sun since the first chapter was leaked in 2008 or whatever it was. Like, it's been a long time, and it finally came out this year. I thought it was interesting. It was nice to listen to. When I like posted my review of it, I said it was nothing revolutionary, and that's still kind of how I feel about it. I think that when E.L. James writes the 50 Shades series from Christian's point of view, it's very different to hear his side than what Anna is seeing, but with Twilight it's really not that different. But you do get some of the closure from like, I'm sure at this point everybody's seen Twilight, from like the 3 days that Edward disappears to go on a hunting trip and things like that. You kind of get the closure of what was happening behind the scenes during that time and what he was thinking the whole time that he was with Bella. But I will say there was a lot of complaints about Bella's scent. We get it. She smells like a human. You want to drink her blood. Stephenie Meyers, please give me a new detail to read about. The next book I read was Normal People by Sally Rooney, another book that I lent out to a friend and haven't gotten back yet. But it's just an easy to read, easy to digest novel about two high schoolers who are kind of hooking up behind the scenes and don't want anybody to know about it, but then they end up going to college together and things get pretty complicated. It's a fun story, but I feel like the end of this book didn't have a lot of closure. I found myself really wanting a sequel, which I know there's not going to be one of. I do know that this was made into a TV show, and I have not yet watched the TV show, but I would like to eventually. The next book I don't have with me because it's in Scott's car, but if it is What If It's Us by Becky Albertalli and Adam Silvera. This is about two high school boys who meet over the summer in New York City, and they think it's fate, so then they try to force fate and reconvene and keep redoing their first date until they have to leave each other, and it's cute. The sequel just came out. I do want to read it. The next book I read is The Paris Architect by Charles Belfour. This is somehow the only historical fiction novel I've read this year, and given that historical fiction is one of my like favorite genres, that honestly shocks me. But it's about a broke architect who was living in Paris during World War II, and he is offered a bunch of projects making hiding places for really rich Jewish families to keep them safe. So there's a lot of like really interesting moral questions and things that are brought up. And I think ultimately it really just shows you not to judge a book by its cover, because somebody that you meet could present themselves as one thing but be totally different on the other side, and you really have absolutely no idea. I really enjoyed The Paris Architect. I think it was one of my favorite reads this year, and I would highly recommend to anybody who likes historical fiction. The Guest List by Lucy Foley was my next read for the year. This is about a wedding on this says a remote Irish island. I would consider it more like deserted, but there was a giant storm, things go wrong, and it serves as the perfect backdrop for one of the wedding guests disappearing. It took me a long time to get into this book, but I know a lot of people read it and love it immediately. I did like it by the end, but it took me, I don't know, it took me a while to get through the first like 85 or 100 pages. I guess books that I've already read from a different point of view are a huge category this year. So my next book is Belfour by Anna Todd. This was not on my TBR to start the year, but when I saw that it had come out, I knew I needed to read it. So this is the book after, written from Hardin's point of view. This series is about a girl who lives a really sheltered life when she's in high school and has a really strict mom, and when she gets to college goes a little crazy. She meets this boy Hardin, and he is a very bad influence on her, but they end up together. It's a romance novel. I'm not spoiling anything. I will say I was slightly disappointed in this book because I think they had a chance to redeem Hardin the way they kind of redeemed Christian in the 50 Shades series from his point of view, and that they sort of tried to do for Edward in Midnight Sun. But I don't think they did that for Hardin. I think they made him look worse. And I don't know. I hope they keep writing this from his point of view so we can see his character development by the end and him becoming a better person and be proud of Hardin and who he is. Because this book is not a great picture of him. The next book I read was 1984 by George Orwell. For my description of this book, I literally wrote, and I quote, "Does this book even need a description?" It's a dystopian novel about a society in which the world is separated into three classes, or three parties. So there's the inner party, which is kind of like Big Brother. They make all the rules. They're the government. They make all the decisions. And there's the outer party. These are the people who are more intelligent, and they have the ability to work more like white collar jobs. And then there are the proletariats, or they call them the proles, and they are like the blue collar workers, and they're not subject to any of the brainwashing and watching that the inner party is subject to, not the inner party, that the outer party is subject to by the inner party. They kind of just get to live their lives, but that's because they're considered not smart enough to do so. So this book is a cautionary tale about totalitarianism and what the world can look like when that is the government function. So let's hope we never live to see the day where 1984 is something we actually have to deal with. The next book I read this year is Devotion by Madeleine Stevens. I made the goal to find a couple of books that were a little off the beaten path, and this one was so much so that I could not find it in any stores. I had to order it on Amazon, which I absolutely hate doing unless I'm gifting somebody a book and they live far away. It's about a poor person who is living in New York City, and she takes a nanny job for a really rich family, but kind of becomes unhealthily obsessed with the white. It's a really interesting book, although I will say they should have trigger warnings on here somewhere, and they don't, for sexual assault and stalking and self-harm. There is a lot of talk about those topics, and they weigh very heavily on this book. So if those are problems for you, stray away from this. Otherwise, it's really good. My next read of 2021 was Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I talked about this in my 5-star reads video. I know it's a super controversial book. Some people love it and think it's great, and some people think it's incredibly boring. I fall on the side of people who love it and think it's great. But I also really liked reading To Kill a Mockingbird, so if that's something that was dreadful for you when you had to read it in high school, maybe steer clear of this book. But it's about a 7-year-old girl living in the swamp in the South, and her whole family abandons her, and she is forced to raise herself with no formal education and no money. The next book I read, I also don't have with me because I bought it for somebody else and read it to vet it before giving it to them, just to make sure that it was good, because there's somebody who doesn't like reading, and I thought that this book could maybe help. So I wanted to read it first just to be absolutely 100% positive, and I loved it. It ended up on my 5-star list. The first book I read by Taylor Jenkins Reid is Daisy Jones and the Six. I don't think I've said that yet. It's about Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac and the story of what conspired there, but it's told interview style, so you're reading as if you're the interviewer hearing the band tell you their stories, which sounds confusing, but it's a really cool way to read a book, and it makes it easy to put it down and pick it back up. I think that this would be an incredible book to listen to as an audiobook. I know Steph Borer talked about how great that was when she did that, and I can understand how listening to the 7 different voices and all of the other people who were involved would be cool as an audiobook. It would be more like listening to a podcast. The next book that I read is The Honeymoon by Rona Halsall. And this book, I will say right off the bat, had a lot of spelling and grammatical errors in it, and that always kind of bothers me in books. Obviously, I don't put that on the author, that's completely on the editor. They should have caught those things, but I thought that the actual plot of this book was really good. It's about 2 people who meet, they fall in love, they get married, or 6 weeks later, and they go on their honeymoon, and they should have spent some more time together first, and it's very obvious. A mild thriller with a little bit of romance. This is a really good book. The last book I physically read in 2021 was November 9 by Colleen Hoover. I did a whole reading vlog of this video, so if you want to hear a more in-depth reaction, feel free to watch that. This is the first book I ever read by Colleen Hoover, and I was not disappointed. It's 2 people who agree to meet on November 9th every year for the next 5 or 6 years and see what their lives look like. So I would highly recommend this book. I think it was absolutely incredible. The last book that I read in 2021 is another audiobook, and it was The Christmas Bookshop by Jenny Colgan. It's about a girl who moves to Edinburgh to help an older man with this bookshop that is about to go out of business because it doesn't make any money, and she is going in to try to save the bookshop. So it's a Christmas book. It's warm, it's homey, it gets you in your feels. Those are all the books that I read in 2021, and now I'm going to quickly breeze through my 2022 TBR list. So this is my TBR spread in my bullet journal. It's supposed to look like a book, and then this is the spine, although I sort of messed it up. So, now going through this. First one was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I've already finished this book. Absolutely incredible. The next one is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. The Inferno by Dante. I would like to read the whole trilogy. Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy has been on my list for a while. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Golden Girl by Ellen Hilderbrand. The Outsider by Stephen King. The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. There's Someone Inside Your House by Stephanie Perkins. No One Ever Asked by Katie Ganchert. The Dinner List by Rebecca Searle. Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Here's to Us, which is the sequel to It Ends With Us, by Becky Albertalli and Adam Silvera. They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. Frat Girl by Kylie Roche. 6 Wicked Reasons by Joe Spain. Tweet Cute by Emma Lord. The Song of Achilles by Madeleine Miller. The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. The Fine Print by Warren Asher. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. And The Geography of You and Me by Jennifer Smith. So that is every book that I read in 2021, my TBR for 2022. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.